And Professor Kismet for inviting me to Leuven and everyone for coming. This is one of the most beautiful halls I've ever been in a lecture. Completed his 99-bedroom mansion in Ibadan, one of the biggest series in Africa. By all standards, Adebisi mansion was not only the biggest private home in Ibadan of the period, it became the barometer for measuring aspirational goals during and after the demise of colonial rule. The architectural magnificence of the home was codified and then archived in aspects of Yoruba oral literature that defined social class. Adebisi onile ko Adebisi warned the masses against trying to replicate Adebisi's success. They should simply build their homes in accordance with their budgets. With time, the moral pedagogy of Adebisi would assume new meanings across changing physical and cultural landscape without losing its core message: live according to your means. The significance of Adebisi's mansion transcends its clear architectural exceptionality. Indeed, it complemented colonial urbanism without overlooking some of the core features of Yoruba family compound living tradition. In this lecture today, I would like to put social, urban, and architectural history in conversation with one another. I argue that how people build their homes is not just a function of architectural preference, notions of urbanity, socio-economic styles, and technological advancements. It's also about how they create and sustain political and religious spiritual communities. From the very spacious family compounds of the 19th century to the massive mansions of the 1940s, to the four-bedroom duplex of the 1970s and small two-bedroom bungalows of the 21st century. The expansion of Ibadan from a small work camp in the 1830s to one of the biggest cities in 21st century Africa can best be understood within the context of a relatively unchanging perspective about home ownership, rituality of power, and global cosmopolitanism. The common saying that Ibadan does not pay rent does not mean people don't pay rent. They actually pay rent. It only reflects the stereotype attached with lack of home ownership. The metaphor as well as the practicality of home ownership, socioeconomic status, access to land, have all been responsible for the ultra-urbanization that Ibadan has witnessed since the 19th century. Ibadan defines some of the core assumptions or facts sometimes about urbanization processes across the world. The higher the population, the increase on the pressure on physical infrastructure, especially the roads. I'm not suggesting that there's no pressure on physical infrastructure. Rather, the unending speciality of Ibadan at the expense of the village and farm-based responds creatively to the creation of multiple city centers within the large city itself. So when people brag that their village is now part of the Ibadan city, they are simplifying the complex transformation of farmlands into built environment, industrial blocks, and concrete. They are simplifying the gradual death of a dual residency culture that allowed people of the past to experience the bustling life of the city as well as the tranquility of the village at different times of the year. History matters in everything, not just because of my own selfish perspective as a historian, but because it's just the only way to understand everything. And in order to understand how Ibadan became the city of houses, we need to go back to the pre-colonial period, identify core issues in colonial modernity, and then be able to think about what the future holds in terms of livability and in terms of speciality. So what I'm going to try to do now, what I'm saying is what you know. I'll be fine. Okay, let's just go. The house again. Then some ladies, mothers. Then the city in terms of the speciality. And a photo of Ibadan in 1850s, right? Ibadan began as a war camp, and unlike most cities in Africa, its history is relatively younger, but it's not like Ife, but it's not like even Lagos in terms of its population. We know when it started, effectively. It began around the 1830s when a bunch of warlords decided to create the city as a refuge place from the numerous wars in the hinterland of 19th century Yoruba. The story of these wars is well documented, and I will not take you into it. But what transpired about it was how population settlement was defined by the unique physical space, the landscape that allowed people to be protected from the marauding warriors of the period. So Ibadan started as a war camp, and because it started as a war camp, it lacked some of the quote-unquote originality that you find in most African cities. The originality that I'm talking about is the originality that has to do with ancestry, originality that has to do with claim of ownership. At the time, unfortunately, some Yoruba ethnic groups will come together to define the ownership of Ibadan. And again, long story which I won't be able to talk about. So Ibadan began around the 1830s, and by the late 19th century, it will become conspicuously one of the biggest cities in what would later be known as Nigeria. And Ibadan conforms with what is known in African studies that, dual residency. Dual residency is the way through which people live partly in the villages and they live partly in the city. The village is where the farm is, the city is where is the center of civilization. And this kind of dual residency has been around for a very long time. The concept of the city at the site of modernity. We identify modernity as something that began even before colonial period. So the idyllic part of the city itself would be the villages. And this is what we have. This is African Nigeria, and this is what Ibadan is. And what I have here is the original development cluster of the city. Every big series, regardless of how big they are, have their own original clusters, which some people would define as the core. And what I'm trying to do today is to look at how the speciality of the city responds to availability of land, and how the availability of land turns the city Not, unfortunately, like Lagos, a city of big capital, but a city of homes, essentially. So this is the original, what we define as the core, the original part of the city from the 19th century. The units of social institution is the compound system. A compound operates not only where people live, but also where they socialize. It's the unit of political life. The leaders of the town individually comes from the compound. And the design of the compound aligns effectively with the social institutions, not only of the compound itself, but of course of the leadership. So, how you define and how you design the compound speaks effectively to how people live their life, their sociality, and their political institution. It's also the unit through which foreigners were integrated. So in other words, a newcomer into the city becomes integrated into the compound, making it possible for the compound's population to increase. Population has always mattered in social and political institutions. The larger your compound, the more the capacity to mobilize economic resources. The more economically significant your compound is, the higher the chances for competing for political power. Politics is economy, economy is power, and political economy of Ibadan, like most universities, is tied directly to the ability of each compound to mobilize economic resources. And of course, it's not just about living. It's not just about dwelling homes. It's not just about how people exchange social relations within the compound. It's about aesthetics, yeah. Each compound has its own stride, and stride is also a function of the history of each compound and the history of those who made each compound. The walls are designed based on the spiritual identities of the founder of each compound. The doors of each of the home can also tell you a lot about the history of each compound and the making of the identities of each compound. And this is significant in seeing how livability, how people lived, is the significant factor of their spiritual identity, their political identity, and of course their understanding of beauty itself. Architecture is not just about where people live, it's also about where people think about their own spirituality. And this is basically the smallest, this photo again is from 1850s, and this is the old, one of the oldest photos we have about an compound, and of course by the compound by extension. And what you will have again are rooms all around, the veranda. The courtyard would always be seen not only as where people play, but also as where you hear laws. You know, laws are enacted. It's a kind of a course, not less, but some of them are much more beautiful. The arrangement of this room is fundamental. That's how people live, in a kind of a compact system. And the compactness is important, not because there's no land, but because that is how communities are created. You have to be closer to your neighbor, and this is important. This would, of course, change in the colonial period and the post-colonial period, when new notions of livability challenge the communal and the compact culture of both times. I have for you, this is the photo of my family compound. This is where my dad was born 8 years ago. And the Belgium means court. Like I said initially, each compound has its own court, where the head of the compound listens to complaints. Because the compounds operate like many political entities within the broader political entities themselves. Again, how people live is not just a function of architectural preference, socioeconomic styles, and technology. It's about how they create political as well as into spiritual community. For Ibadan of that period, and even till now to an extent, the spiritual and political community is far more fundamental than even the idea of economy and social status of most people. But things will begin to change as we expect, and like the previous speaker consistently referenced colonialism, fundamental, and I agree with her that we don't know what will have happened without colonialism. Things will begin to change. The British arrived, and what is defined as colonial modernity began. And colonial modernity was transforming not only how people live, the kind of homes they build, how they socialize, and how they think about community. I wouldn't like to go so too much into the rhetoric of how colonialism destroyed African communal system. But what we know is that the rise of educated elites, predominantly people who studied in Britain and of course studied in Nigeria, transformed not only how homes were built, the number of family itself, and of course the size of each home. And most of them will begin to be what is known for the first time as a single family home. The concept of a single family was of course a colonial concept. A home of 4, maximum of 6 people, the husband being the head of the family and the wife being in Christian colonial culture, the second appendage, the nucleus thing, Then we have maximum in most cases the nuclear family of the period, maybe 6 maximum. Now it's shrinking because of childcare. So I'll deal with that in different ways. Then the concept of segregation would begin to emerge. In this slide, the city would have, like most African cities, European population, European neighborhood and quarters, and of course African neighborhood. And as you would expect, with time, the European neighborhood would receive the best care, both in terms of physical infrastructure, design and layout, than the African community that would continue to increase in population, but of course bad and poor facilities. And the European community, of course, is not just about Europeans. And one of the arguments I was trying to make with a friend recently is that even the so-called European quarters could have more Africans living there. Why? Because each European quarter has African cook, African cleaner, African washer. So the European family of 3 could actually have 6 people serving them. In other words, a typical home of European and colonial culture would have 6 Africans and 3 Europeans, even though the neighborhood is defined as European neighborhood. This is fundamental for understanding series. So, about segregation along ethnicity and along the ways of the mind. It's also going to emerge along ethnicity. People find it much more convenient to live among people of their own ethnicity. And from 1893, 1900, all the way to 1960, distinct communities emerged. Why is this important? It's important because the family compound model of the pre-colonial period was given away gradually to non-family compound model, in which you cannot have a home in somewhere else. And if you can build homes in somewhere else, then it means they can expand. Compounds cannot be established anyway. Until today, you cannot have another compound outside the nucleus of the city. Because of this model, individual homes become the most important factor in driving the speciality of the city. In other words, the city was expanding because establishing a compound would become anachronistic. And this is important for understanding how Ibadan became bigger to some extent. It was also during this period that Brazilian architecture became a significant aspect of self-fashioning. People were fashioning themselves in their own homes. The beauty of your home defines everything. The social capital, essentially. And it was unique. It came predominantly from Lagos. It was in Lagos, one of the indices of Lagos modernity from the late 19th century. But during the first half of the 20th century, Brazilian architecture was becoming popular in Ibadan. Who does not want to live like Lagosians? And who does not want to live like Lagosians? And this is significant for understanding new architectural taste during this period. Let's see the next slide. So the second process of city expansion will happen here. And all this place, so this is where the university is, the oldest university in Nigeria, established in 1948. And this area would pave the way for people who are highly educated, predominantly civil servants, who would be building single-family homes. And of course, the university itself has a bunch of houses, and most of these houses today were single-family homes. The other hand would be indigenous, supra-indigenous. What does this mean? It's still Yoruba people from Ijebu, from Abeokuta, from all over the internet. However, they would not build single-family homes. It's going to show you the kind of homes they will build shortly. They will build big homes, but the model is to have a big homes that can still accommodate a lot of people. In other words, the family compound model, which is building to the ground, may be disappearing from the colonial period. A new architectural mindset will emerge, and this architectural mindset will also appeal to the feeling of having a community, even though it's occupying a smaller space. So some of the things, some of the homes we have, Ibadan. And you're going to see some of the few features of Brazilian architecture in Ibadan this time. some features of the Brazilian architecture. The family compound homes again built to the ground. And I'm going to talk more about this kind of homes within the context of land tenure and how people actually live. Some signs of modernity in Ibadan. One of the beautiful hospitals, districts. So what's happened in post-colonial period? Like I said again, the family compound model will begin to shrink because it was becoming anachronistic to have family compounds. And the new architecture would be what she refers to, of course, face nest, I face you. And the colloquialism is face nest, not you. These are homes that faces one another, and it emerged as a result of the anger by urban planners after the 1960s that Ibadan is unplanned. You know, the concept of urban planning is one of the most interesting things to think about. While the modernists thought that the city is not planned, the indigenous conception of city thought was planned. After all, there are compounds. If they are compound, it means well planned. But modernist notion doesn't believe or respect the concept of compound. The concept is simple: layout, series. So individual identification, people were now becoming to be identified not by the compounds they belong to, but by the neighbor. And the neighbors were defined, of course, to some extent, by street. And this will continue all this while. After the 1960s, like any new fashion, Brazilian architecture was not becoming so important again. What is more important is this: can you have a single home that can accommodate 50 people? Can you have a single home that can accommodate 100 people? Yeah, it's possible. And that is the concept of face-made ISTRP home. And it was also during this period that the idea of Ibadan don't pay rent exists. Yeah, they don't pay rent. Why? The reason Ibadan don't pay rent, I'm kidding, you're actually the reason Ibadan, the whole idea of Ibadan don't pay rent is that families build homes for families. So you live in your uncle's home, you live in your father's home. When it's time for you, when your family gets big, you have your first child, you have the second child, and you want to take the third child, you have to leave. And living means having your own home. And your own home is not just 1 room or 2 rooms or 3 rooms. It's another big house, minimum of 8 rooms. You use probably 2 or 3 of the rooms, and your brother also comes in and takes a room. So that is how the concept of not paying, although it has been there even before colonial period, but it still remains an important factor. The reason they can afford not to pay rent is because they have access to land. And this is one of the most important factors that separates Lagos from Ibadan. Lagos, there's no land. Ibadan, there's land. And that's we're going to talk. We're going to see something. So the next level of urbanization is going to be now in the fringes. As you can see, it's getting really bigger. And this used to be the older one. And this now in areas. Much of this area, because this area is also highly beautiful in terms of the development, in terms of the homes. These areas will also have similar characteristics. But unfortunately, the kinds of homes we're going to be talking about shortly, single family homes, 2-bedroom homes by single servant, were imagined in these areas. And remember, all these areas used to be what farmlands, allowing people to experience both the urban life, which used to be at the center here, and of course the tranquility of the village life, which used to be the village or farm belt. A simple design of the family house compound, the first and Socio-Political model. This is the road, and these are the homes. That's why they face one another. And the concept remains, the concept of building a home that can accommodate a lot of people. So in most cases, this will be 1 or 2-story homes, and these are rooms. A typical home probably has minimum of 16 rooms, sometimes minimum of 8, 4 at a row. Whether you like it or not, it's still doing exactly what they wanted it to do. Large family, a kind of a communal life that is of course different from the compound life. This will be the elite homes. Again, as I mentioned, the duplex. These are in highly regarded neighborhoods, predominantly for upper class, Ibadan civil servants, and of course university professors. This is where I was born and raised. This example of the so-called faceless practical. This is how it looks. This is the 4 rooms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then of course another road, and the middle is actually the passage. My mom, before she passed 6 years before, our room used to be here. And of course the head of the house, My dad is going to be the first to be late, you know. So it still appeals to the concept of power, the kind of, the kind of livability, the kind of who is the coolest, who is accurate, that my dad, the house, and his room has to be strategically placed to emphasize this kind of relations. There's another room house on the back. This photo was taken 6 years ago when I went to Nigeria. So as we continue, new things were happening all the time, even in the 21st century. Economic crisis intensified, were not created in the 21st century, they've always been there. The whole idea that 1980s is the period of Nigerian, like most African economic crisis, is a legitimate fact. But all these crises have always been there before the 1980s. The 21st century characterized by the introduction of democratic rule in Nigeria, but it did not solve economic crisis. And how do people respond? People respond to economic crisis in different ways. And the concept of I have to build a home is still fundamental. So people don't have the money to build a kind of home. The home I just showed you, the way I was born, my dad built it in 1968. He's now 80 years old. You can't, regular people can't build that kind of home anymore. But they can do something. They can build smaller homes just for their families alone. So the concept of small homes, single family homes, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, was a 21st century phenomenon to a large extent. Because in the past you can't actually do that in life. You can actually do that. So people were revolting effectively to communal family life because it was not economically viable to operate it. The kind of family system of the colonial period cannot survive in the 21st century. It takes more money to run that kind of family. But by withdrawing away from that communal system and having a single family of 2 bedroom, individuals and people were responding to the crisis of development. But their home, the kind of homes they were building, was helping them to respond to the crisis of development itself. And that is the way I would like to think about it. And it has to be liberal. Liberal in the sense that what is important is not more of the beauties, it's just about it functions. And the functionality itself is about the rooms, about the fact that you can have bedroom in each of the rooms, and the fact that it can actually live a little bit separate. There's a lot of space between one home and the other. And this is, and all these homes were being built were all being built in villages. And that's very important for us to understand the nature of city. Unlike most cities, Ibadan has the capacity to expand. And this expansion itself is responsible for notions of home ownership. So architecturally, most middle class, if that is the right word to use in any part of Africa anyway, are able to afford homes, partly because of the fact that on one hand there is middle, and the middle class I'm talking about is not the Lagos middle class, it's the middle class of the internet in Ibadan, in Abeokuta, and other places. And of course with this, there's going to be a collapse in the farm belts. So this would be the simple design of a single family home, the entrance, the bathroom, the toilet. One of the significant architectural innovation, if that is even the right word to use, is the whole idea of having a bathroom in each bedroom, bathroom in each bedroom. So, and this is important, not only for privacy, but also for the notion of progress for most people. Maybe 700 square meters, because very small rooms, very small houses to like this. And of course, this is the house I was talking to you about, my house in Ibadan, completed just a few weeks ago. I would like to use the picture to speak about another factor in the concept of home building. The whole idea of pushing the boundaries of the farm or the farm belt itself. It's not just about those who live permanently in Nigeria and who are born and raised or live in Nigeria. There's a new movement, of course, if movement is the right word to use, by those who live abroad, especially the diaspora Africans, to build homes abroad. You can't define your success totally until you are able to have your own home in Nigeria. So building a home at home, even if you're not going to live there at all, is one of the ways of demonstrating success that you have arrived. And sometimes that it was good traveling abroad, or it was even legitimate or worthwhile to live in a very cold environment in winter. But for me, it's actually not, it's less about that. It's more about the opportunity to be back in Nigeria to be able to do research. I spent 2.5 months in most cases in Nigeria doing research, and I wanted a place where I can do research at the same time back. So the architecture and the design of this house is more about the ability to go back home in some activities than proving to anyone that I'm successful anyway. And of course, most of these homes are important. The way it is built aligns with the dual residency. In this case, living abroad and of course living back in Nigeria. Most of them would have a big queue, a small house where someone will be living, because you don't want to live this kind of house for maybe 10 months or 9 months in a year. And it's just a unique kind of building that allows people to be able to live back away and also be sure that someone is living in their house. So this guy who's going to be living there is living in this house, at the same time, he's not living there because of the attachment itself. So what is going to be the feature of the city? How do you reflect over the city? Ibadan doesn't have boundaries, and you hear this all the time. But of course, there are boundaries. We know where the boundaries are. We know where the Ijebu boundary is. We know where the Abel boundary is. But when they say that Ibadan is a city without boundaries, they are again reinforcing the depth of the village and the farm depth, which have significant implication on food supply. Food is becoming more and more expensive. That's never been cheap, because the land that people are supposed to use for agriculture are gradually evaporating and disappearing and taken over by concrete. Even it's too big to have a king. Yeah, that's another implication. Because the city is getting bigger and bigger in terms of the speciality, there's new politics of identities about what actually constitutes kingship in the city. The city is so huge that modern political infrastructures think that it should have more kings. But of course, it's not because urban planners and politicians think that that would help to better distribute physical infrastructures, hospitals, good roads to people. Doesn't mean it's going to help poor people who are always physical. It's only about the capacity to break the power of the monarch, so that if you have more kings, you can manipulate the political destiny of the town. Because Ibadan is the biggest city in Oyo State, political control of Ibadan is fundamental to political control of Oyo State. This is how city governance, the size of the city, the organization of the city, and its speciality can shape political power and political process. Our village is not a town. You hear it all the time. You hear it all the time. And of course, it's fine for people to say it, but it's also problematic, given the fact that it has a lot to do with the disappearance of the village. Concept of building your homes, you have to finish your homes, that people wanted their homes to be built. The concept of building a house abroad, the whole idea of having private homes is not economically viable for you to build big apartment complexes and rent it. Nobody's going to rent it at regular rates. Most people find it easier to build their homes. And of course, it's apparent from what I've just said that no two cities are the same. The analysis we've heard about Lagos, of course, carefully contrasts what you see in Ibadan. So I would like to return to the story of Adebisi. Apparently, Sanusi-Giwa's house was not just about the beauty of the house, it was contesting the power of colonialism. It was contesting some of the paraphernalia of the state. It was assuming and accommodating some of the paraphernalia of the state. Adebisi Shalajane Atukane, be a Bokolami, Ojura Benosa, Baba Kandai. Thank you for listening.